There is a quiet moment that happens in the life of almost every working adult, and it usually arrives without warning. You check your account balance on an ordinary afternoon, perhaps between meetings or while waiting for coffee, and for the first time in your life the number reads 10,000. Nothing in the room has changed. The walls are the same, the chair is the same, the city outside the window continues moving exactly as it did the moment before. Yet something inside you shifts in a way that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has never experienced it. Because what changes is not your circumstances, but the entire architecture of how your mind interprets the world around you. For most of human history, survival was measured in days, sometimes hours, and the human brain evolved under those conditions to treat money the same way it once treated food and shelter, as something to be consumed quickly before it disappeared. This is why people who live paycheck to paycheck often describe a strange feeling of relief when their account empties, because the brain interprets a zero balance as a return to its baseline state rather than as a warning signal. The first time you cross into a balance that represents more than a month of survival, the brain encounters something it has no built-in instructions for, which is the experience of having time. $10,000 is not a wealthy number by any reasonable measure, and anyone who has lived in a major city understands how quickly that figure can dissolve under the weight of rent, insurance, transportation, and the small daily expenses that accumulate without notice. Yet psychologically, 10,000 represents a threshold, not because of what it can buy, but because of what it can absorb. It is the first amount large enough to act as a buffer between you and the immediate consequences of a single bad week, and that buffer fundamentally rewires the way your nervous system responds to ordinary financial decisions. Researchers who study financial behavior have documented a consistent pattern in which people below this threshold make decisions optimized for short-term survival, even when those decisions are mathematically harmful in the long term. A person with $200 in savings will often accept a high-interest loan to repair a vehicle, because the alternative, losing transportation to work, represents an immediate collapse of their entire income structure. The same person, holding $10,000, can absorb that repair without borrowing, and in doing so avoids the compounding cost of interest that would have followed them for months or years. The difference between these two financial outcomes is not intelligence, discipline, or ambition. The difference is simply the presence of a buffer large enough to allow the brain to think beyond the next 72 hours. This is where the psychology becomes deeply systemic, because the mathematics of money rewards those who already have a buffer and punishes those who do not, often in ways that are invisible to the people experiencing them. Consider the simple example of insurance. A person with savings can choose a higher deductible and pay a lower monthly premium, knowing they can absorb the occasional larger expense. A person without savings must choose the lower deductible and the higher premium, paying more every single month for the same coverage, simply because they cannot afford the risk of a sudden cost. Over the course of a decade, this single decision can cost thousands of dollars, and it is a decision that has nothing to do with financial literacy and everything to do with the absence of a cushion. The same pattern repeats in nearly every corner of modern economic life. Bulk purchasing requires upfront capital and rewards those who have it with lower per-unit costs. Annual subscriptions cost less than monthly ones, but require the cash to be available all at once. Investment opportunities with the highest long-term returns often require minimum balances that exclude anyone living near the edge. Even something as basic as overdraft fees exists almost exclusively as a tax on people who cannot maintain a positive balance, charging the highest fees to those least able to afford them. This is why economists describe poverty not merely as a lack of money, but as a structural condition in which the cost of being poor exceeds the cost of being financially stable. When you cross the $10,000 threshold, you do not simply gain access to better financial products. You gain access to a fundamentally different version of time. People with savings think in months and years, while people without savings think in days and weeks, and this difference in temporal horizon shapes every subsequent decision in ways that compound across decades. A person thinking in days will accept a job that pays slightly more today even if it offers no growth, while a person thinking in years will accept a lower-paying role that builds skills, network, or equity. Neither person is wrong within their own framework. They are simply operating under different conditions of temporal pressure, and the buffer is what creates that difference. There is a deeper psychological layer beneath all of this, which involves something researchers call cognitive bandwidth. When the human mind is occupied by the constant background calculation of how to pay for the next necessity, it has fewer resources available for long-term planning, creative problem-solving, and the kind of patient strategic thinking that builds wealth over time. Studies of populations under financial stress have shown measurable declines in working memory and decision quality, not because those individuals lack intelligence, but because their mental processing power is being consumed by survival arithmetic. The buffer, in this sense, is not just financial, it is cognitive. It frees the mind to think about questions other than tomorrow. What makes this particularly important to understand is that the shift does not happen gradually. There is no smooth transition from scarcity thinking to abundance thinking as your balance slowly climbs. Instead, there are thresholds, and crossing each one produces a discrete change in how your brain processes risk, opportunity, and time. 10,000 is the first of these thresholds for most people, the point at which a single, unexpected event no longer represents catastrophe. Beyond that come other thresholds, each unlocking a different layer of financial behavior. From the ability to consider career risks without panic to the eventual capacity to allow money to grow on its own through investment returns that exceed your living expenses. The cultural narrative around money tends to focus on the symbols of wealth, the cars, the houses, the visible markers of success. And this focus obscures the far more important truth that the real transformation happens internally, long before anything external changes. The person who first crosses 10,000 often looks identical to the person they were the week before. Their clothes are the same, their habits are the same, their daily routine continues unchanged. Yet the way they walk into a negotiation, the way they evaluate an opportunity, the way they respond to an unexpected bill, all of these begin to shift in subtle ways that accumulate over months and years into outcomes that look, from the outside, like luck or talent, but are in fact the slow compounding of a mind no longer governed by immediate scarcity. Understanding this changes the question you ask about money. Instead of asking how to become wealthy, which is a question shaped by the very scarcity it tries to escape, you begin to ask how to build the smallest possible buffer that allows your brain to operate in a longer time horizon. That buffer is the foundation on which everything else is built, not because it represents freedom, but because it represents the first moment in which freedom becomes thinkable. Without it, every decision you make is filtered through urgency, and urgency is the most expensive condition in modern economic life. The $10,000 threshold is not a goal in itself, nor is it a marker of success in any meaningful social sense. It is simply the point at which the mathematics of your life begins to favor you rather than work against you, the moment when time becomes an ally rather than a creditor, and the quiet beginning of a different relationship between you and the systems that govern modern money. Everything that follows, the investments, the opportunities, the patience to wait for better outcomes, all of it depends on this first invisible crossing. And almost no one talks about it, because almost no one notices the moment it happens. But it happens, and when it does, the world does not change. You do.